Hi, my name's Steve, and this is Christianity Out Loud. Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in, wherever you are watching, wherever you are listening. YouTube, Rumble, Locals, any of those. I did say previously that these would be going up on Spotify as well, but that evidently costs a little bit of money per month, which I don't really have to spare at the moment. So it'll go up on Spotify. Well, the plan is it'll go up on Spotify and other audio podcasting areas, platforms, a little bit later. So YouTube, Rumbles, Locals for now. You can connect on them, connect on Facebook as well. If you like what I'm doing and what I'm saying, why don't you subscribe? That'd be wonderful. That'd be awesome. Trying to build real community here. So this week, a couple of things I'm going to look at, but none of them COVID related. So we can pop the streamers and blow bubbles and do all sorts of things about not talking about COVID, which is quite nice. I'm not going to talk about the Queensland government still not letting Queensland residents back into the state just yet. I'm not going to talk about Premier Daniel Andrews breaking his own mask mandate and then amusingly copping a $400 fine for doing so. I found that funny anyway. Or the new South Wales Premier being absolutely grilled by all manner of press because he happens to be a devout Christian. So apparently it's only Christians that get grilled on issues of morality by the press when they take public office. So leave that all there. So much there, but I'll leave all of that alone. This week we are taking the long journey over to the United States of America. And I know that there's a lot of experts on American politics here in Australia, but this is not on anything political. Trump bad, Biden good. I think that's what I'm supposed to say. Anyway. So, John Gruden, former coach of the NFL team, the Las Vegas Raiders. And I quote, Gruden resigned as head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders on Monday after a series of old emails emerged in which he used racist, misogynistic, and homophobic language. Old emails, old. I don't know what he wrote, but it was from some years ago. James Gunn, acclaimed film director, fired initially, then rehired by Disney for posts. Well, he was fired at least initially for posts he'd made on social media some 10 years prior. Again, I have no idea what he wrote, but by his recollection, he was trying to be provocative rather than offensive. And again, I don't know what he wrote, but when the entire cast of the film that you were supposed to be directing comes out in support of you, I guess that maybe says something. Who are the cast of the Guardians of the Galaxy film franchise? Only names like Chris Pratt, Zoe Saldana, Dave Bautista, Vin Diesel, Bradley Cooper, Sean Gunn, Michael Rooker, and Pom Clementine. I apologise if I've got that wrong, but these are not bit part actors. These are franchise leading actors and actresses here. All came out in support of James Gunn. And not only that, it was interesting to see after he was fired, the fans crowdfunded and put up a billboard asking for his reinstatement. So And all of this actually brings me to Dave Chappelle. If you've never heard of Dave Chappelle, he's a black man, American comedian. I don't care really to mention anyone's race or ethnicity. It means nothing to me aside from providing context for what I'm about to talk about here. See, as Christians, we often find ourselves the butt, if you like, or on the receiving end of many jokes from many comedians. Religion is a go-to, an easy target, if you like, for the topic of their humour. And Ricky Gervais, for example, is an avowed atheist, or at least he used to be. I haven't read anything that suggests he changed his opinions there, but he routinely mocks religion, even going so far as to say, and I quote, "I think religion's greatest trick wasn't convincing someone there was a God who was all-powerful. I think it was convincing someone else that you couldn't ridicule the idea." Now, I don't have to like that joke, or any other joke that Ricky Gervais or any other comedian tells. I don't have to. If I don't like their comedy, I don't watch them. It's really that simple. George Carlin routinely made fun of religion, but it does raise an interesting question. What is the point of comedy? Yeah, think of the best comedians here for a minute. Eddie Murphy from the early 1980s, Richard Pryor, George Carlin, who I just mentioned, routinely made fun of religion, Norm Macdonald, etc. No, there's a long list of pioneering comedians who are left out, and these are just some. What did they all have in common? They all pushed boundaries. Nobody was safe. They were fearless in approaching taboo topics, but they also were self-deprecating in their humour. They didn't mind first poking fun at themselves in order to then have a joke at someone else's expense. If you even go down the route of Christian comedians, someone like Tim Hawkins or Bill Engvall, for example, even they still push boundaries of what is funny. They will still make fun of marriage, of women, of work, of church, of religion. They push boundaries, even albeit within a much more confined space, but they still find what can be funny and go from there. In my opinion, regardless of his social cultural views, Dave Chappelle is one of the funniest comedians that has ever existed. In my opinion, you don't have to like it. I think he's a very, very funny man. He once had a character in one of his skits who was a blind black man who was a member of the KKK. And this character obviously had no idea he was blind, had a dislike for a certain group of people, and found a group of people who shared his opinions, and decided to join the KKK because of his dislike. The joke there is quite obvious. But it's multi-layered and very cleverly created, but it's also a profound statement about prejudice. See, within humour can be an underlying message. This is why I think Dave Chappelle's so clever. So he released the last of his Netflix specials. It's either the 5th or the 6th. I can't remember. He signed on for a few. This is the last one. And predictably, from the predictable groups within society, he copped the predictable criticism that you would expect. Why did he cop it? Because he pushed boundaries. He commented on current issues, including race, gender, suppression of speech, equality, fake news, etc. All of that. Nothing was out of reach. But he ended this special with a story about Daphne Dorman, who was a trans woman he became friends with. No spoilers here at all, but I'd encourage you to go and watch it. If it's available on Netflix Australia, I'm not sure. But watch it, then form an opinion of it. Anyway, Chappelle, he goes on to say that Dorman was the opening act for him one night at a comedy club. And afterwards they had a fairly frank and honest discussion about trans identity. And when Chappelle said he still didn't understand, Dorman's response was that they didn't need Chappelle's understanding, just their compassion. Understand that she was going through an experience and be respectful of that. It wasn't long after that Dorman actually made very positive comments towards Chappelle and their blossoming friendship. But sadly, Dorman died of suicide about a month later. What's the point? What is the point here? Well, in this case, Dorman's family actually defended Dave Chappelle. And I quote, Dorman's sister, I beg your pardon, said, quote, "Dave loved my sister and is an LGBTQ ally." So the point is this. What sort of society are we living in? More to the point, what sort of society do you want to live in? Does anybody remember why Israel Folau is no longer employed by Rugby Australia? Perchance? I make a point in what I hope would be my upcoming book, that one of the biggest issues facing the 21st century is that of censorship. And we saw some of that in the last American election, and objective censorship of stories that could have persuaded people to vote differently. We know that things were deliberately withheld from the public. Censorship. Just read a history book. Good societies aren't forged through the suppression of speech. It stands against democratic processes. It stands against freedom. And who were the governments, what were the styles of governments that went through and suppressed and cancelled speech? Who were they? The Marxists, the Communists, the Nazis. All of those political systems are synonymous with banning of books, suppressing speech and thought, silencing opinions. As a Christian, I don't want anti-Christian rhetoric, thought, speech to be silenced. I don't. I can't read anywhere in the New Testament where Jesus or the gospel writers or any of the other letter writers, call for speech to be suppressed. I can't. If anybody can, let me know. But I don't think it's written anywhere there. Jesus and the disciples did manage to silence dissenting voices, but it was through open dialogue. It was through conversation. it was through ministry, it was also through listening. Anything else is social justice posing as law. It's interesting. It's worth reminding those on the side of equity that a black man became president of the United States of America. We currently have a black lady vice president of the United States of America. We've had female prime ministers here in Australia and New Zealand, and that's the highest public office one can attain in those two countries. An Islamic man is currently Mayor of London, and there are gay men and women represented at the highest levels of government throughout the Western world. I'm not saying they're doing a good job, any of them. I'm saying that those demographics, those groups, if you like, have been represented at the highest level of public office. It's secularization through the lens of cultural Marxism, along with a never-ending quest for diversity. Except diversity of thought, we're not allowed to have that, because that's seen religious discourse, philosophy, ethics, morality lose ground in the public sphere. And that's partly people trying to silence dissenting voices, but I actually lay a lot of the blame at the feet of Christians and churches. The Christians and the corporate churches who decided that acceptance was more important than the gospel message. And as soon as you take that step, once they decide that their own voices and messages aren't worth hearing, no wonder the rest of society stops listening to what we have to say. So, yeah. Multiculturalism, also pluralism, is evident, prevalent throughout Western society today, but I'd find it difficult to define, say, a 21st century Australian or American or English person for that matter. We have become so intertwined. It's Andrew Samuels that wrote, pluralism is an attitude to conflict that tries to reconcile differences without imposing a false resolution on them, or losing sight of the unique value of each position. I'll put a reference to that quote below. But unique value. Unique value. The voice of Christianity must be heard. When multicultural and pluralistic ideas transition into relativism, more barriers arise, because relativism removes all absolutes regarding truth, regarding knowledge, regarding morality, in relation to culture, society, historical context. Absolute truth cannot exist within a relativist framework, and then we have an existential problem starting to emerge. Now that's pretty deep, but when you consider morality, culture operates in one of three ways. You have a theonomous culture, which is where the law of God or natural law is self-evident. Things are obviously good, obviously bad, and either beneficial or detrimental to society. So if you think of Islamic countries run by Islamic law, that's a theonomous culture. Not necessarily a good thing, but that's a theonomous culture. A heteronomous culture, which is where you've got two distinct laws functioning at the same time. You've got a controlling minority, right, which controls a majority, dictates everything to them, and Marxism/communism is a quintessential example of that. That is how those governments manifest themselves. Okay, we the few dictate to you the majority. We've got an autonomous culture, which is one of self-law, which is where individuals are afforded the right to pick and choose what they want to do. So most of the Western societies today in the 21st century fall into the autonomous category. But are we autonomous? Are we truly an autonomous culture? Because if I, as a Christian, respect someone who wants to live a different lifestyle to me, should that respect not be reciprocated? Should I not be afforded the privilege of my autonomy? My choice to follow God? My choice to walk in the direction where I think the truth leads? So in 21st century Australia and, well, across the West, the predominant structural underpinnings, freedom, inclusiveness, diversity, have all been redefined by a postmodernist interpretation of language, which now means they are essentially meaningless. They mean whatever the speaker intends them to mean, or they mean whatever the hearer interprets them as meaning. There is no point of reference for words within a postmodern society. So if your opinion is that marriage is between a man and a woman, for example, you are labelled discriminatory, homophobic, and you have little recourse for defence, because that's what I say you are. I am forced to answer for my beliefs under the guise of living in an autonomous culture. However, whenever I state my beliefs, increasingly people who hear them revert to a heteronomous culture and tell me that I cannot believe that. I'm told it's not an acceptable belief, and I must conform. Ideologists claim to represent inclusion, but the moment a public opinion is different, then it's wrong, or it's bigoted, or it's any other kind of phobic. And I must renounce that immediately. I must align my thought with theirs. And more concerning is the appeal to governments to suppress dissenting voices, the legislation of what is acceptable belief. But forget me, because Dave Chappelle is attacked for telling jokes to his audience. They paid to see him. His audience paid to see him. The critiques aren't coming from his audience. See, Christians can and we need to do better than that. I mean, what do we think of King David? What do we think of King David? Yes, he was a poet full of literary brilliance, full of godly fear, godly reverence, and godly awe, who had sex with his neighbour's wife and then ordered the death of his neighbour. Both sides of the coin with King David, but so did Jesus. And in Revelation 22, Jesus referred to himself as the root and descendant of David. Any Christians engaging in this mob-like mentality need to be reminded of Paul's rather blunt writings in Romans, where all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That is an all-encompassing word. All means all. I'll leave you with this from Colossians 3, verses 12 to 14. Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Forgive. It's a novel idea. It's not just a novel idea for us as Christians, it is an inherent requirement of our relationship with God. God forgives us when we forgive others. Until next week, God bless.